Some say it's impractical, some say it's illegal, some say it's just downright immoral. I'm talking about the government's plan to stop boats coming across the Channel carrying asylum seekers to this country, a plan the Prime Minister says he has a lot of support for. Tonight we are in London, at St Luke's in Islington, to be precise. This is where the London Symphony Orchestra calls home. It's also a solid Labour area at council and national level. And, of course, our audience here, as always, reflects the wider electoral support for the political parties across the country. And among the questions they're asking tonight are, should the BBC give Gary Lineker a red card? Should Boris Johnson's dad get a knighthood? And how do we solve the housing problem? Welcome to Question Time. I'm sure it's been a busy week for Robert Jenrick as Immigration Minister. He's responsible for small boats policy, asylum decisions policy and border force operations. He was previously in the health team in Liz Truss's short-lived government, before that serving as Housing Secretary under Boris Johnson. Labour's Sarah Jones is Shadow Home Office Minister. She's previously been Shadow Housing Minister and has also long campaigned for more action on knife crime. She was elected as MP for Croydon Central in 2017. Ken Clarke has held many ministerial briefs in his career, including Home Secretary and then Chancellor in John Major's Conservative government. He was an MP for nearly 50 years, from Heath to Johnson, before leaving the Commons in 2019 and taking his seat in the Lords. His finest political achievement? Well, he's appeared on Question Time more often than anyone else. Tonight is his 60th appearance. In her own words, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown is a lefty, liberal, anti-racist feminist. In her long career as a commentator, journalist and author, she's written several books and for several newspapers. She's won the George Orwell Prize for Political Writing and is a former columnist of the year as well. And as a mainstay of daytime television for years, many people have had their morning cuppa with Richard Madeley at one time or another. He's a broadcast veteran, beginning in local radio before becoming a well-known TV host on This Morning with Richard and Judy and Good Morning Britain, among other things. He's also written several fiction and non-fiction books. Good evening from London. Welcome to you all. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to all of you here to see you. Very good to see you, as always. And, of course, welcome to you at home. Do join in the conversation the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. Tends to get pretty lively on social media. Let's hear what you've got to say. And a reminder that as well as being on BBC One after 10 o'clock news, as always, we are also live on iPlayer at 8 o'clock, so you can catch us in both places. Right, let's start with our first question from Louise. Louise Gu.
How effective will the illegal immigration bill be in deterring unauthorised immigration into this country?
Well, Robert, obviously I'm going to come to you first as Immigration Minister. How effective will it be as a deterrent?
Well, I hope it will be very effective, and we haven't reached this point lightly. We've tried many things, but the problem has escalated, and last year we had 45,000 people getting into small boats, risking their lives, spending their life savings at the behest of evil people smugglers and coming into our country in breach of our laws. And if we do nothing, those numbers will keep on rising, because there's no shortage of people who want to come here, and there's no shortage of people smugglers and criminals who want to facilitate it. So we have to say that enough is enough. We have to take decisive action. And the only way we will break the cycle is if we create a deterrent that means that people don't want to take that risk, don't want to put themselves at the behest of those people smugglers. And so our policy is based on a very simple principle, but one which I think has broad support amongst the British public, which is that if you come here illegally in a small boat, you will not have a route to a life in the UK. You won't be able to settle or become a citizen here. We'll process your claim in days and weeks, not months and years, and then we will return you to the country you came from, if it's safe to do so, or to a safe third country like Rwanda, where you can make claims, you can rebuild your life in safety there. And it's only by doing this that we can secure our borders, we can bring fairness back to our system, and we can focus the finite resources we have as a country on the people who need our help the most. Those people who are genuinely in conflict zones, victims of war and persecution, human rights abuses.
In order to do this, it has to be legal as well. And just explain to me what appears to be a contradiction is that on the face of the bill, you've got warnings from government lawyers saying there's a more than 50% chance that it won't be legal, and you have the Home Secretary, and presumably yourself, saying, oh, I'm utterly confident it will be legal. How do those two things go together?
Yeah, so it's a technical point, but when a minister brings forward a piece of legislation, they have to attest on the face of it to whether it meets a high bar, which is to say that government lawyers and the Attorney General believe that it is clearly in compliance with our international law obligations. But that's a high bar.
And they're saying it doesn't look like it is.
Well, they're saying that it doesn't meet that high bar.
Well, 50% is not very high, is it? 50% is 50-50.
Well,
and they're saying there's a more than 50% chance.
It is because it's a relatively conservative test of the law, whilst in areas like this is obviously a crisis. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. This is an emergency situation. You have to reach for novel, new legal arguments and solutions to problems. And in these sorts of situations, it's not surprising that they may be contentious legally. This is a perfectly proper thing to do, incidentally. It's been done in the past. It was done by Nick Clegg when he pursued House of Lords reform. It was done by...
What was done? Not the asylum bill. What are you talking about?
Attesting that a bill meets this standard. So putting on the face of the bill that the government believes it's compatible, but it can't meet this high standard. It was done by Tessa Jowell in the last Labour government when she produced a Communications Act. So it's a normal thing to do, but to my mind, we would be failing in our duty, the first duty of a government, to secure our borders and to protect national security, if we didn't seek out the most innovative and creative solutions to this problem. That's what this bill seeks to do in a very legal and fair and moral way.
Sarah.
Can I just start by saying I'm the MP for Croydon Central. 8,000 people who work for the Home Office work in my constituency. Thousands of them are my constituents. Many of them work on asylum and immigration. And they are really upset at the words of Suella in an email that she sent asking for money, calling them an activist blob who were to blame for the problems that have been caused by this government in terms of the delays and the problems that we've had with our asylum system. And I wonder if the Minister would like to just take this opportunity to apologise to them.
Well, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has been very clear that she didn't send that email. It was sent by a sort of party apparatchik without her permission.
So, nonetheless, do you want to apologise for it?
We've all been very clear that that isn't a reflection of our views. Of course, I don't think that. I work with dedicated civil servants every day at the Home Office. They know that I respect them. I'm grateful for the hard work that they do. And I'm also very grateful for the people who are on the front line working for the Home Office, like the people who are saving migrants' lives at sea tonight on our cutters, the people who are greeting them when they arrive at Western Jetful, our border force officers who are keeping us safe.
All right, let me come back to
We
Sarah.
have the greatest respect for those people, and that email is of no reflection of my views or those of the Home Secretary.
So the question is, how effective will this bill be?
Just to say, somebody thought that, for anybody to think that that was appropriate says something about the leadership at the top of ministers, I would say. So we need to do something about small boats, absolutely. But let's be clear, that the problem is that the Home Office has been ground down over many years and is not processing the claims that are coming forward. 1% of Albanians who came last year have seen decisions. We have such a huge backlog that we have thousands of people in hotels costing millions of pounds every day.
But is that your primary objection? Or are you not objecting to the idea that people who come over on small boats will be detained for 28 days and then sent either back to where they came from or to somewhere like Rwanda? Are you happy with that?
What we are saying and what we believe is that there are things you can do to fix this problem, to stop people coming on the small boats.
But so do you object to that part of the policy? I'm just trying to be clear.
We will be voting against this bill as we voted against the bill last year that said it would do exactly the same thing and has utterly failed. There was a piece of legislation last year, the Nationalities and Borders Bill, where they said exactly the same thing would happen and it didn't. And actually there are thousands of people who are just sitting with no decision, not being sent back, nothing being done. Now look, what we need to do is we need to tackle the gangs. This is a new problem that has emerged over the last 4 years. We have these massive organised crime gangs that are dealing in smuggling one day and drugs the next. Now, we have said we need to set up a cross-country border force that works with other countries to get the people that are leading this.
We already have that. So
no,
it's
you
called
don't
the National
already
Crime
have.
Agency.
No, you don't already have that.
We
The
do.
National Crime Agency, I know well, I've been in and spoken to them. It is not the scale that we need to be looking at. And the conversations you're having with the French about more border police at the border on the coast is like if you're trying to tackle county lines, it's like putting the police on the train and hanging around and waiting to see if you see anyone who's bringing drugs on the train. You need to tackle the problem at source, and Labour would do that. We need to stop the boats, but we need to do it in a way that works. This bill won't work.
All right, there's a lot of hands up, so I'm going to come around to you all pretty quickly, if I may. Yes, the man there in the pale blue shirt.
I think the focus is on the wrong thing with this bill, because you're targeting the victims rather than focusing on the people who are criminals. And if the government wants to be creative and do something illegal, then perhaps they should arrest those criminals and send them as volunteers to the Ukraine.
Right, well, that's a radical suggestion. Yes, there's a woman there in a black top.
Suella Braverman claims that she had nothing to do with that, but it's the kind of language that she would use, and she has used before.
So Suella Braverman has talked about illegal migrants pouring across the channel. She's talked about an invasion, and I think this is what you're referring to, I'm assuming. She said there are 100 million people displaced around the world, likely billions more eager to come here if possible. Ken Clarke, you were previously Home Secretary. What's your feeling about that kind of language?
I think everybody should tone down their language on this rather emotional subject on both sides of the aisle. Because it's a very difficult question. I hope this bill is going to be effective. I very much doubt whether it will be, because I don't think anybody's solved the problem anywhere yet. I don't think the Labour Party have a clue how to solve it.
What aspect of it will be ineffective?
Well, the reason I support the aims is because the symbolic quality of all this is not the major part of the immigration problems of this country or the world. We have the highest net immigration we've ever had, and particularly since Brexit. And the way we keep our very harmonious relations here, by and large, in our multicultural, multiracial society, which I enjoy living in myself, compared with the narrow society that I was brought up in, is by keeping people under control and reassuring people that it's under control and you're not having people just flooding in here at will. The trouble is, nobody has an answer to it. It's a global problem. All over the world, there are about 50 million people displaced by war or anarchy. There are people living in countries where their governments have broken down. If I was a young man in West or East Africa, I'd be planning with my friends how to get to the United Kingdom to have a better life in future. And the Americans and the Germans and the French have a far worse problem than we have, and they're no good at solving it either. And the difficulty with this later effort, I hope it works. But the idea that you're going to find, quotes, safe countries who will take tens of thousands of people we don't want, saying we're sending them to you and we're never going to take them back. I mean, it's extraordinary. The Rwanda thing still got to work. But I don't know how many the Rwandans will take. But they went. We've got about.
Hang on. Let Ken finish.
We've got about 60,000 a year going to come this year across the. I don't think the Rwandans will take all those. And many of them will come back and try again. I mean, Robert is relying on what the Australians did, which is the deterrence effect. You make it more difficult and you make it more tricky for people, then they will stop coming. Well. The Australians put people in rather nasty conditions on Pacific Islands, and it did actually work to a very considerable extent. But, I mean, with the greatest respect, the geography involved altogether different to our Channel crossing. But I just hope someone comes up with a solution. hope this solution works. It will be very good for our own relationships in this country, make it easier to deal for the very generous arrangements we make for places where we're involved, like Hong Kong, Ukraine. We might get the Afghan scheme to work properly, which it's not working at the moment, to take more Afghans who are in danger because they worked for us when we were there. Yep. And we just need this fuss, this symbolism of these dinghies coming over the channel brought to an end. It'd be fine if you could get to catch the criminals, you know, be terrific, try it. Time we abolish bank robbery, catch all the bank robbers, you know, it just isn't going to work. And if you catch the ones who are organising it, there are plenty of people who will come there and organise it again. There's a lot of money in it. So we're still searching for a solution. Hope you're right, Robert. I'll believe it when I see it.
All right, listen, I'm going to come to you, Per, in a minute. But just, do you want to answer that? I mean, Ken's point is it's for the birds to suggest that there are countries around the world that are going to take tens upon tens of thousands of people from us.
Well, I think Ken was right, essentially, that the key to this policy is deterrence.
But where are you going to put them in the meantime?
Well, initially, if somebody cannot be returned to their own home country because it's not safe, and there are safe countries we can return people to, like Albania, for example, with whom we
OK, but you've done it. What about other... So what about France? What about Italy? What about Austria? What about Germany?
They will be returned to Rwanda. And contrary to what Sarah said, that's not correct. I believe I've spoken to the Rwandan government. They're willing to take as many people as we
But they can only take 200 at the moment.
No, that's not true.
But would they be prepared to take tens of thousands?
They would be prepared to take tens of thousands, but that won't be necessary, because what will happen, I think, pretty clearly, is if you realise that you cannot make a life in the UK, then you're not going to waste your life savings, put yourself in a very dangerous situation in a boat, and make this crossing at the behest of people smugglers. So the deterrent effect is what we saw in Australia, where within weeks and months, the numbers crossing started to fall away.
But that's what you said about the bill last year. That was going to be a deterrent effect.
You mentioned the bill last year. The bill which you voted against last year had things like life sentences for human traffickers.
It's made the problem worse.
You voted against every single measure.
Let me bring Yasmin in, who's looking very frustrated.
None of them have worked. The problem has got worse year on year
whatsoever to tackle an issue that the British public care passionately about.
To tackle the traffickers.
Could I please speak? Because I am astonished that neither of the political representatives have mentioned the human beings, and I'm very pleased somebody did that. These are human beings. Number two, I promised myself I wouldn't get overexcited, but really this has left me choking. You are trashing, between you, Labour and the Tories, are trashing the legacy of the man this country holds to be their greatest hero. The two treaties, the agreements that were signed in 1948 and 1951, protected the rights of refugees, and that was Winston Churchill.
So you're talking about the European Convention on Human Rights and the UN Refugee Convention.
And in those conventions, sorry, you've all had your time. You're going to
Yasmin, this is your moment.
Thank you. In those agreements, and Suella knows this to be what she's saying is untrue, it gives every refugee or asylum seeker the right to go to whichever country they choose, the first, second, or third.
So it's the first
wait,
safe
no,
country.
can you? No. I didn't interrupt you. Okay, you've got to let me speak. And that they can come undocumented, because back then, way back then, they understood human suffering. They understood that you can't get proper papers and documents and have all that in place. They say you're coming from a country like Iran today, or a woman in Afghanistan. And to think that that legacy is being trashed by what are really teddy boy Tories and also the Labour Party, cowardly Labour Party, absolutely makes me ashamed, really.
OK, I know you both want to come. I do want. I know. I'm going to come back to you, but I don't want to come back to you right now because there's so many hands up. Right. My goodness me, where shall I start? OK, the man waving frantically at me there. Let's start with you.
Thank you. It's fair to say that This is, it's probably the country's most highly charged and emotive subject that we all face as a country. And I think it's important to bear in mind, that hasn't really been mentioned yet in the debate, that there is a very big issue of national security. We have no idea who's coming into the country, and that, I think, from the point of view of best practice, is something to look on. But I don't think this issue is ever going to be resolved, but it's the Conservative government, the current Conservative government, or be it a Labour government at the next election, which may happen. I don't think any government will be able to resolve this situation, because overall it is the issue of human rights. And I think that is going to override any plans that may come to fruition. So I think it's, and also in terms of the cost, by the way, I think one of the panellists was talking about the cost. At the moment, it's £7 million a day and rising to put up all the current immigrants. So there we go. A very, very challenging
Fiona, can I make one little point? A little point, just a very little point. We take fewer asylum seekers than any other major European country. And my old country, Uganda, takes the second most number of refugees in the world today. And it is far poorer than us.
We've actually resettled more people in this country.
Yes, but that's a very specific subsection, Robert. Well, look, we have a graphic. We have a graphic here. Let's show. So just well, here, Robert, you can see here. So, as top asylum destinations, so number of applications: Germany, France, Spain, United Kingdom. And if you look at it on a per head basis, we're somewhere down at 16th or something.
Yeah, but
I'm going to come back to you.
You've just shown statistics. May I correct them? Because what that does.
What you're saying that's wrong?
It's misleading.
How?
Because in addition to asylum seekers are people that we've resettled to this country, and we are the second largest recipient in Europe, after Sweden, of people who we have decided to resettle here. 150,000 from Ukraine, over 100,000 from Hong Kong.
No, but that graphic doesn't include people from Ukraine, including for Germany, who's taken nearly... No, but if you include the Ukraine... Hang on, Robert, wait. If you include the people from Ukraine, Germany, for example, would be way higher.
We have record-breaking net immigration of about 500,000 coming here. Record-breaking numbers of people, a scale never seen before. From
but some of those people applying for visas are coming on. But some of those are students, they're people coming on work visas.
More people.
There's not asylum seekers.
They're not going to come here,
to move to a rich Western country. Yeah. You have to ask, what about our system? What about our welfare state? What about our health service? What about our housing problems?
Ken, thank you.
Go up above what is already a record.
Just to be clear, because Rich, I'm going to come to you now. The 500,000 is not asylum seekers. The 500,000 includes people applying to work and for visas. Just so we can. No, Robert, wait 1 second. I need to get to Richard.
500,000 people have come to the UK on humanitarian visas, like those from Ukraine, since 2015. Well, it is true, Yasmin. I'm the immigration minister. I know the statistics.
And I don't believe you. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry. It is absolutely true. And your agenda is to somehow present the UK as a mean-spirited, ungenerous country. That is wrong. Well, that is wrong. We are welcoming more people into this country than at any time in our history.
I'm presenting your party.
Well, we created, Yasmin, the Homes for Ukraine scheme.
No, I tell you what.
We created the Hong Kong scheme.
OK, don't both talk at the same time.
I came as a Uganda nation. The same hysteria greeted us. But we had a Tory PM who was honourable, Ted Heath, who understood his obligations. We don't have those Tories.
OK, let me, Richard, I will come back. No, I'm going to let you, I'm going to come back. I must let Richard, who sat here very patiently.
I'm quite used to it. Absolutely fine. Well, it's interesting. I'm probably the only apolitical member of this panel tonight, because I'm genuinely apolitical. I see almost everything through a journalist's eyes, actually. I've been a journalist for 50 years. And what's intrigued me about the last 20 minutes or so is that I think every single person who's spoken on the panel and out there in the audience, I've agreed with elements of what they've said. And what that demonstrates to me is that this, as you said, Ken, is a very complex problem. And I think that the big issue this week, actually, over and above of the initial proposals has been the extreme language, again I agree with you, Ken, on both wings of the argument. We've got these ludicrous claims by the Home Secretary, which I challenged her on yesterday, as did Susanna Reid, my colleague on GMB, challenged her on about, initially she said in the Commons, millions of refugees coming here illegally, and in the Daily Mail yesterday she wrote that billions would be coming here illegally. It's transparent nonsense, absolute nonsense, and actually degrades her argument and degrades her intelligence. At the other wing, and I think I'm the first person to mention him here tonight, you've got what Gary Lineker said.
Can I just say we are going to come to Gary Lineker?
Oh, okay.
There might be no surprise, because we had a tsunami of questions about that, so you might want to hold your fire on that.
I'll hold my fire on that one, but I'll come to that. But that was at another extreme, the other wing, and I think we've got to be in the middle ground to discuss this sensibly and fairly. The question that kicked this off 25 minutes...
I think we've almost forgotten that now, haven't we? Will it be an effective deterrent?
How effective will this be? My answer to that is, looking at it, is probably not very, if at all. And that's based on two things. What's happened with the Rwanda proposals? Not a single flight's gone to Rwanda. It's still mired in the courts. And what you said, Fiona, which again we put to the Home Secretary yesterday, and frankly she dodged the question, which is that the government's own lawyers, before this announcement was made, told them explicitly that there's a larger than 50% chance that this legislation will not get through the courts. Now, I don't know what they advise them on in terms of Rwanda, but that's what they said about this policy. And that being the case, it seems to me that what we've been seeing this week with the Prime Minister and with the Home Secretary is posturing. Because, as you said, something's got to be done, and both parties agree that. And I think the Conservative Party and this government are trying to demonstrate to those who agree with them, probably a majority in the electorate, that they mean business and they're talking tough. But they know from their own solicitors that that's going to be very difficult to achieve. So I think, frankly, all around, in the middle of the argument from the government, from the Home Secretary and from, we'll come to him, a football commentator, we've seen a lot of hot air this week, and we need to calm it down.
Right. I'm going to come back to both of you briefly, but the audience has not had much of a shout, so I would like to come to some of you. Yes, the woman here in the blue shirt.
Thank you. I'm just a little bit disturbed to hear legislation like the Human Rights Act or the European Convention of Human Rights described as a high bar. Surely that's not a high bar. That's the fundamental laws that Parliament agreed to is a basic protection for civil liberties in this country.
Man in the blue sweater.
So, yes. This scheme, this announcement, it is illegal, it's impractical, and it won't work. Not to say it's also inhumane, but really, it's actually not about whether it's going to work or not, because as stupid as Suella Braverman does sound when she uses words like blob, workerati, or whatever nonsense she wants to spout, that's not what they're trying to do. This isn't even about the actual scheme itself. They're forecasting to the next election. They can't run on their governing record. There's sewage in the rivers. Inflation is through the roof. Living standards are beyond the floor. They can't run on individuals or personalities. They have ex-chancellors who don't pay tax. They have another ex-chancellor who knew the currency was going to run, so he told his former employers to bet against it. So what do they have left? All they have left is division, and this is all this policy is about. They are trying to sow division by casting it as us, the people in Britain, against people who want to come here. And it's really sad. Okay. I think that I have faith that people are not going to buy it, because unlike them, it also just fundamentally betrays that they don't think the way the Conservatives don't think the way that we do, because we think compassionately.
And the man there in the stripy jumper.
Yeah, I just want to say I think we need to stop hyperbolising this issue, because, like the panel have said, it's tens of thousands. It's not 100,000, it's not millions, it's not billions like Suella Braverman saying. It's tens of thousands of people. And it's just the kind of rhetoric that the government is using is moronic, it's ugly, and it taps into a really dangerous rhetoric that taps into a really ugly aspect of our society. And it's just making things worse. And if anything, at the end of the day, for most people, refugees aren't the cause of your suffering. It's like the other gentleman said, it's the economy, it's inflation, it's the fact that nurses aren't really getting paid enough. So I don't appreciate this distraction technique to target people who literally don't have a voice and kind of throw them under the bus and use these policies as a way to say, oh, look, we've ticked this off the bus, we're stopping the boats, because you know what, It just, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
OK, very briefly.
Can I very quickly just jump in? With,
really quickly, because I've got to let Robin say how quickly
just
have
a
a right
couple
of
of
reply.
sentences. One other reason I did want to say this to the original questioner, why I think it's unlikely to work, is what seems to me to be the inherent practical flaw of the policy. If it goes ahead, you're going to get genuine asylum seekers who've got a real reason to want to come here, still trying to get here illegally, and their stories are going to come out. And we're going to get media coverage of tragic stories of people who really deserve and need to be here, being sent away and never allowed to apply again. And I think that will undermine it fatally, even if it gets going initially. Sorry.
Very briefly, I know you've got a lot you want to say, but very briefly, because I need to move on.
There is so much to say.
Sarah, and then I'll come back to you.
I think
Try not to say it all.
Most people in this country want safe, secure borders, and they want a fair and managed asylum system so we can do our bit in this country. This bill will not deliver that. So Yasmin's right. If you are an interpreter who fled Afghanistan and you missed the last flight out of Kabul and you've come through via one of these routes, you know, you are not going to be helped. We are going to turn you away, really? And it's not going to work because practically the government has had no conversations about proper safe and legal routes and proper return agreements. So you can't just take people, lock them up for endlessly when you have nowhere to send them, because you can't send them back to the country they come from because it's too dangerous. It's against international law. So it won't work. That is my main point.
Robert.
Well, I rather agree with what the gentleman said there. What's Labour?
I didn't catch it.
When Sarah says she wants more safe and legal routes, we have 500,000 people who've come to the UK in recent years on safe and legal routes. So what she means is unlimited, uncontrolled, illegal migration. I mean. Well, I think that's the truth. You just have to be honest. You just have to be honest with the British public about what you're really saying.
That's not.
But to the point that Richard was making, you have to remember that all of these people are in France. France is a safe country with a well-functioning asylum system. These people are not in a place of danger. They may have come from a place of danger originally, but they are in a place of sanctuary today, and they are choosing to get into boats at the behest of people smugglers, often to throw their documents into the sea and then to break into our country. And by doing that, they are... Well, I believe in borders, Yasmin. I believe in our sovereign borders. And if you break into a country irregularly, then I'm afraid you're breaching the law. But the key thing is, by doing that, by coming instead of someone who we want to get from a conflict zone, you're skipping the queue.
But we're not sending them back to France, are we, under these proposals? They're not being sent back to France to a safe haven.
They're not being sent anywhere.
Exactly.
Well, we're deterring them from coming in the first place.
Well, are you?
That is the intention of the policy, is to deter them from coming in the first place. And you've got to remember that these are mostly young men. They are mostly fit, healthy people who are wealthy enough to pay people smugglers for the passage. These are rarely families. They're not people coming directly from conflict zones. We have finite resources as a country, as Ken said, in housing, in GP surgeries, in education. We should put those finite resources against the people who need it the most in the world and break the people smugglers.
Syria and Afghanistan.
Well, we have schemes for those.
No. Syria and Afghanistan are the two major countries where these people are coming from.
But we have schemes for those countries, Yasmin.
No, you haven't.
Yes, we do.
I'll tell you, you've taken
23,000 people from Afghanistan.
In 2022, 22 Afghans were settled under
since Operation Pitting, we've taken 23,000 people from Afghanistan.
No.
You don't like the figures, Yasmin.
I don't like your figures, you're right.
You don't like the facts.
All right. I don't think you're going to see eye to eye. We've spent half an hour on this. We could easily spend the whole hour. I see that, and it's certainly important enough a subject. But you asked lots of other questions when you came tonight, so I'd be derelict in my duty if I didn't try to get around to some of them. Before I do, I'm just going to tell you where we're going to be next week. Question time is in Warrington next week. The week after that, we're in Newcastle under Lyme. So if you want to come and be part of the audience, look, everyone wants to have their say. You can have your say as well. Go to the Question Time website. The address is here on the screen. Follow the instructions. You can come and be part of our audience. Warrington and then Newcastle under Lyme. Right, now, for as many of you asked about asylum, it was not that far off, as many of you asked about the next question, along a similar line. Piers Bishop.
Should Gary Lineker be shown the red card by the BBC?
Right, OK. Now, unless you've been under a rock somewhere, I don't know, you won't have missed this story. So, obviously, Gary Lineker has been tweeting about the thing we've just been talking about. And in his tweet, he said, this is an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 1930s. Now, what I think we're getting at is should he be shown the red card? Obviously, the BBC operates under particular guidelines, and presenters such as myself have to operate under them. Rich, I'm going to come to you as the journalist on the panel. Should he be shown the red card?
No. I think, and I speak as somebody who's actually been attacked by Gary Lineker on his Twitter page, and I don't mind at all. It's called free speech. I think that if Gary Lineker was... I think if Gary Lineker clearly was a political journalist, a political presenter, interviewer, in any of the areas of the BBC that we're talking about, Newsnight, you know, what used to be Panorama, etc., then clearly he shouldn't have made those comments. It would be a dereliction of duty and deeply compromising to his programme, to himself and future interviews, and, of course, to the BBC, publicly funded by us, because we pay his wages. We pay his £1.35 million. But he's a sports presenter. He talks about football and games and tactics and headers and corners and referees and league tables and all the rest of it. And quite how having the freedom of speech on his not on any of his programmes, but on his own Twitter page, to say anything he likes within the law escapes me. I think it's preposterous to say that he should be muzzled and muffled, and that means I think it's ridiculous to suggest that he should be sacked. And do you know what? I'm not sure even the government think that he should be sacked. Again, so I'm sorry to refer to this again, but we had the Home Secretary on GMB yesterday, and I put this question to her 3 times. Would you welcome the sacking or the resignation of Gary Lineker? And all she said was, well, we're very disappointed in what he said. If they thought that, she would have said it. So I don't think he's going to be sacked, and I certainly don't think he should. And, as I say, as someone who's been attacked roundly by him, only once, but it's happened in the past, I say more power to his elbow on his Twitter page. And if he wants to write something stupid, this is the other point of the argument, then he's free to do it. Of course, what he wrote this week, some of you won't agree with this, but most of you, I think, will, was preposterous. I mean, to draw a parallel between the Nazi regime of the 1930s in Germany. I know he didn't use the word Nazi, but he talked about Germany in the 1930s, so it was implicit. And to compare that with our government, or any European government at the moment, or the Australian government, which has extremely strict rules against immigration, much stricter than the ones being proposed here, I think was just absolutely absurd, and actually an insult to the memories of the people who died for freedom in the Second World War, and an insult to the minorities and the Jewish nation, who were subject of acts of genocide by the then German dictatorship. And to draw a parallel between that and the Conservative government or any other government in Europe is just stupid. But he's entitled to be stupid.
Sarah. Should he be shown the red card?
Well, look, I wouldn't have said what he said. I think comparisons with 1930s Germany are not ever going to be helpful. He is a high-profile figure in the BBC. The BBC does have impartiality rules, but we can balance that with the fact that the views were not on a BBC programme, they were on Twitter. He works for other organisations as well. He is...
So when you've got the Director-General saying if you want to be an opinionated columnist or a partisan campaigner on social media, that's a valid choice, but you shouldn't be working at the BBC.
I think he had a right to say what he said. I think people are... The pile-on in the House of Commons that was organised by, you know, Conservative MPs today was you know, trying to kick up a storm. I think you'd ask questions instead about the chairman of the BBC and how he helped the Prime Minister at the time facilitate access to finances. What about him? And I'd also say, where does it end if he was? I mean, it's up to the BBC what they do. I don't know what's in Gary Lineker's contract. I don't, you know, it's their decision.
Well, he's tweeted he's doing Match of the Day on Saturday.
Well, and I think, you know, he is a national treasure. He brings us lots of pleasure for all the things that he does. But what I would say is, if we're going to get rid of him, what about Alan Sugar? You know, are we going to get rid of him as well? What about David Attenborough when he says the government needs to do more on climate change? Are we going to say, no, you can't say that? And I think the thing is, I think his comment was ill-placed. Absolutely, I agree with that. But it was on Twitter, it wasn't on the show, and I think, you know, I think there is a right for him to have his views, ill-judged though they were.
Man here in the front, the blue and white sweater.
If anything, we need more people like Gary Lineker to speak the truth to the power. The comparison to the Second World War is perfectly fine, because The Human Rights Convention was precisely an asylum, was precisely created after our experiences then. The reason you don't have 2 million Ukrainian refugees is because Poland took 2 million Ukrainian refugees.
Okay.
And I got one more thing. The discussions about those people do not include the human factor. It's dog whistling because you need an enemy. First, it was the Eastern European migrants. We figured Brexit. We still don't have enough money for NHS and housing. Now, you cannot fix NHS and housing. It's someone else's fault. It's your fault. And you just need to get it right.
I'm sorry, you think...
OK, I'm going to hang on, Richard. Richard, wait. Yes, the woman there.
Hi. Richard, in the last question, you commented on the divisive language being used by both sides of the parties. Do public figures and politicians not have a responsibility to rather try and drive people apart, but to bring people together?
Yeah, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
Do public figures not have a responsibility to try and bring people together rather than drive them apart? Richard, I'm only not going to get you to answer that because we've had quite a lot and I've got to get around the rest of the panel. And I want to hear a bit more from the audience. So, yes, there's a man there Richard's saying yes, in a blue shirt and dark suit there.
Yeah, I think it's really important that with this issue, we do not over-hyperbolise it. It's very emotive, it is unhelpful for debate, and I agree with what a lot of people have said in regards to that. However, at the start of the World Cup, back in November, December, Gary Lineker called out the Qataris and their human rights abuses.
I mean, that was a BBC statement, just to be clear. That was something that had been approved by the BBC, and he made that statement in the light of that.
But he wasn't, he was
very much agreed by the BBC.
But he was very much providing his opinion when he spoke to camera. It's a big set piece. It was publicised very, very widely. I'm struggling to see what the difference is between that and him then calling out the government's rhetoric against refugees.
Ken, what's your view on this?
Well, I think this is all slightly out of proportion. Modern political debate is more interested in rows about personalities than it is about policies, because policies are difficult and complicated. I think what he said was an exaggeration. I've already said I think people should tone down what they say, particularly on immigration. A comparison with the Nazis is absurd.
But the question is, should he be shown the red card?
Should tone her language around. Some of the stuff she says about the country being invaded and all the rest of it, it doesn't help. You've got to find a solution to the problem, which in our half an hour's discussion, nobody around the table was able to find.
I mean, the question, Ken, is should Gary Lineker be shown the red card by the BBC?
No, of course, he's a sports commentator. He didn't make it on air. If he started making political remarks every week and became a really running political commentator, I think somebody should have a word with him and say, for the BBC, that's not very suitable. But I really do think... I like Gary Lineker. I liked him as a footballer. I watched Match of the Day. He's brilliant at it. And the idea he should get sacked because he makes this remark on Twitter, I do agree. This end of the table's showing harmony this evening. We've discussed politics before. He has said more sensible things in his time. It was an absurd exaggeration, but it would be ludicrously out of proportion to sack him. Absolutely ludicrously out of proportion.
But the gentleman in the front there, who with respect...
Richard, I've got to let Yasmin in.
Very quickly, with respect, said you did support the analogy. I mean, you can't seriously compare the current cabinet to Himmler and Hitler and Goebbels.
No, but you can say... No, you can say... And the lady at the back pointed out, language matters. Language is what started in Bosnia. Language is what started in Rwanda. Language is what... And that's what he was talking about. And the language that is being used first by Priti Patel and Suella and Rishi Sunak, all of them from my background, brown-skinned people from Africa, behaving this way for reasons I cannot fathom. It is important. It's the language he was talking about. And he said something else, which is very important. I'm speaking for the people who have no voice. And let me tell you one thing. For people who think this is... W.H. Auden, who was gay and one of our greatest poets, married an asylum seeker from Germany so she could stay here. And he wrote a poem. Go and read it. It's called Refugee Blues. It was written in 1939. And it says, they say, my dear, if we let them in, they'll steal our daily bread. They say, my dear, there's no space for us here, no space. 1939. Language matters. Those attitudes have come from then to now. And I face it. I face these appalling attacks because of my being a migrant. And every time, and you're doing this, we know the popularity of this government is smashed. The people actually, until this happened, their priorities, according to pollsters, the economy, the cost of living, health, and the environment. They started this, and look where we are.
Someone shouting it still is over there. So, Robert, should Gary Lineker be shown the red card by the BBC?
In honesty, I don't really care what Gary Lineker says. I care about what the British public think. And I think the British public are sick of the votes and they want to see
But what's your answer to the
government taking
question?
action.
Because you've made that point already.
Well,
what's your answer to this question?
I think that it's not for me to dictate what the BBC does, but I would say this, that language does matter. I think all of the panellists agree on that, and we should try to de-escalate this issue generally.
And are you including the Home Secretary in that?
What Gary Lineker said there, what Gary Lineker said was completely unacceptable. There is absolutely no comparison between trying to take action on this important issue and what happened in Germany in the 1930s. That was a shallow comparison. And, well, sir, I disagree with you. What you said tonight was wrong. My children are the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, and I don't think people should bandy around comparisons with 1930s Germany. I think that's a mistake. We should have more intelligent dialogue than that. And Gary Lineker, I think, was completely wrong with what he said. I'm not going to ask the BBC to sack him,
Robert,
but he should choose his words much more carefully.
He didn't he did not say the policy was out of Nazi Germany. He did say the policy was cruel, as Yasmin said.
He was talking about the language.
What he actually said was the language.
He compared it to the 1930s
He was criticising the language of the Home Secretary. He wasn't so mad as to start saying the policy was
that is inflammatory
More
language.
inflammatory than Suella Braverman.
Well, so there's some language you're willing to tolerate because it supports your argument.
No.
I want people to choose their language wisely on all sides of the argument.
Do please communicate that to your Home Secretary.
OK. All right. All right.
It was unwise, no.
Right. OK. Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna move on to another question. Otherwise, I mean, I could just talk about this all night. But the fact is, you did ask lots of other questions. I'm going to have a bit of a go at getting through them. OK, Adrian Height.
Can my dad have a knighthood too?
Now, I'm sure you all know what Adrian's referring to, but just in case you don't, Boris Johnson has nominated his father, Stanley, for a knighthood in his resignation orders, or that's according to reports. Anyway, because we can't be 100% sure about that, but that's what we're being told. Ken?
Well, one gathers that Boris has got the biggest resignation honours list ever, so I hope something is done to actually scale it down. He's entitled to a resignation honours list. I rather like Stanley Johnson. He's like most of the family. He's quite fun. And he has been a politician. He's been quite active a politician. He was an MEP, quite a good... And he doesn't share his son's current views on Brexit either. He's pro-European. So nothing wrong with Stanley. The one person who should not recommend him for a period, for a knighthood, is his son. But Boris has been a little insensitive on these sort of things before.
Robert?
Well, I've no idea who will be on this list.
Of course you don't, but would you oppose it?
Is, as a principle, it wise for a Prime Minister to nominate a member of their own family for an honour? No, absolutely not. But we'll have to see what ultimately is on this list and what the government chooses to do.
Yasmin?
Well, he did put his brother into the Lords.
Oh, his brother's
well,
Boris Johnson.
Well, his brother was a
he might be a wonderful person. No.
And minister.
But for me,
was well qualified, Yasmin, to get
his brother had a career.
Lots of his dad might be very well qualified too, but he doesn't get a look in. For a change, I'm not blaming Boris Johnson or Stanley Johnson. Actually, Ken. He was a wife-beater, Stanley Johnson, on record.
OK, let me just intervene. I'm not disputing what you're saying, but just so everyone knows what this is referring to. So Stanley Johnson's wife spoke to a journalist, Tom Bauer, and she said that Stanley Johnson had broken her nose and she had ended up in hospital as a result. Stanley Johnson has not commented publicly on that. Friends of his have said it did happen, it was a one-off.
Yes, but it did happen. Anyway, what I think is it's not Stanley Johnson or Boris Johnson that bothers me. They are who they are and they do what they do. They think this kingdom is their fiefdom. But it's the system. We need to look at a system where these nominations happen. Why should any Prime Minister, good or bad, be allowed to do this?
Okay.
Can't we have a better, fairer system so his dad could get it too?
Richard.
I agree. I don't think we should ever have a Prime Minister, a retired or sacked or resigned Prime Minister, ever referring any of his family, cousins, uncles, children, parents, ever for an orator, because it's so clearly potentially bent, isn't it? It's obvious. As far as Stanley Johnson's concerned, well, I have to say that I think probably in a year or two, when I open my thesaurus, my definition of wordage, and I look up nepotism, it might be there. It might be Boris and Stanley Johnson. That's all you'll need.
OK, all right.
Nepotism, but no, I can't see, reading the stories in as much detail as they've been published, I can't see anything that Stanley Johnson has done to merit one of the top levels of honour, a knighthood. We're not even talking about a little bit lower down the scale, an OBE or a CBE. And I do wonder what Rishi Sunak will do, because he's the guy who has to tick the list in the end. Will he put it through on the nod, as they put through most Prime Minister's resignation honours, or will he cross it out? And if he doesn't, I wonder if people... I mean, you handed your honour back on principle, didn't you, a number of years ago? I wonder if other people who can currently hold honours will actually hand them back.
Will the government tick it through if it goes... If it is on
in honesty, Fiona, I'm not involved in that process, so I've no
What do you think
idea,
the government should do? Come on, you're a member of the government. What do you think the government should do?
I don't know what the procedures are, but as I say...
I'm not asking procedures. Do you think,
well, no, I don't
the
know
government of which you are a part...
I don't know what the... Well, you're asking me to comment on that. I don't know what the role of the government is in terms of approving the list. My personal view, as I've said, is that it isn't sensible for a former Prime Minister to nominate members of their own family for...
What about this idea that we're hearing
we all
about
agree on that.
stopping Prime Ministers being able to appoint peerages?
Well,
honours, or have an honours list.
I'd say Rishi Sunak needs to make it crystal clear that Boris Johnson can't be putting his father in the House of Lords as a starter for 10. You look at what he had in 2019 and how much he's trashed. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And today we hear that he makes up something like 85% of the extra earnings of MPs, just Boris.
Is this something that Labour might consider, stopping Prime Minister being able to nominate people for knighthoods on their departure from office?
Gordon Brown has done a big piece of work looking at all of the nations and regions, all of the House of Lords, how we want to reconfigure that, and he has some really interesting ideas. I mean, for me, the biggest thing is the size of the House of Lords. It's nearly 900 people. There's 650 elected MPs, nearly 900 Lords. There are some good Lords that bring some great, obviously.
I would abolish it and have an elected House, personally.
All right, OK, all right.
But it does need to be reformed, absolutely.
We've got very little time to take this last question. I want to take this. It's a hugely important issue for people all around the country, certainly here in London. Dilip Bidare, where are you? There we go.
And affordable for most young adults, what is the government's plan to help?
Well,
didn't hear that.
With the question, sorry, Ken, was with property unaffordable to most young adults, what's the government's plan to help? So, Robert, obviously I'm going to come to you on that, but since I've got you here, what's Labour's plan?
So I spoke to Emily Thornberry before I came here because this is her patch, and she told me that the average one-bedroom flat rent here is £1,721, which is quite extraordinary. Home ownership is out of reach for many.
We've got very little time, so I'm going to be what is your plan?
One thing, we would back the government if they brought forward plans to change the planning system. Secondly, private renting needs an absolute overhaul because it needs to be affordable, it needs to be better quality, people need more rights. Leasehold need more reform, and when I was Shadow Housing Minister, I did a whole piece of work about how you would reform leasehold, and we have to help first-time buyers and home ownership because it can't be beyond the aspiration of our kids that they can own their own home. So Labour has a plan in all of those areas, and it's a huge problem here, absolutely.
Rob, obviously this was on your patch as Housing Secretary. What's the government's plan? It's not what you proposed some years back, because that got booted out by your fellow MPs.
I've been a bit of a St Augustine on on this. I've always tried to push for more. I think we have to build more homes. It's obvious we have a housing crisis in this country. You've
been in power for 13 years, so what's gone wrong?
Well, we've built a lot more homes than any previous government. When I was Housing Secretary, house building reached its highest level since the early 1980s. So as a result of reforms to the planning system, investment in infrastructure, creating very large affordable homes programmes that enable homes like shared ownership to be brought forward. We were able to drag house building up from a very low level after the financial crash to levels of around 250,000.
But as you said last year, the government will miss their 300,000 homes a target by a country mile. Those were your words.
I think that's right, because all politicians essentially need to appreciate that young people have to have a foothold in society, have got to get on the housing ladder. And that means, I'm afraid, putting aside the sort of rampant NIMBYism that we do see in Parliament today, whereby members of Parliament believe in the idea of building homes, but not in their own constituencies, not when it comes to the crucial votes in Parliament. Sarah and the Labour Party were going to vote against the planning reforms we were going to do a few years ago. Sadiq Khan here in London has a very poor record
lots of Conservative
on housing.
MPs.
Exactly.
I think. And there's 100 or so Conservative MPs we're going to rebel against.
We have to move forward
building a lot more affordable homes than
Ken, we've not got long, so we're all going to have to be quite brief. Ken.
I disagree with Robert. I agree with Robert completely.
Hang on, which is it? You agree or disagree?
On this, we need to build more homes. Our 300,000 a year target is the minimum we've got to hit, and the principal problem is the planning system, the abuse of the planning system, the litigation that's allowed to flourish when planning applications are made. We can't build major infrastructure either. The problem is the political problem, and the Labour Party would be just as leery if they got into power. The only religion that's followed en masse in this country is NIMBYism nowadays, and people don't want anything built near where they live. It's the thing to do. Whoever wins the election, do it in the first year after the election with the other parties' support.
Richard.
It's the only way you'll ever get it through, and we won't solve our mad housing crisis until we do actually get the rate of building up.
I'll keep it very brief. I agree with both of you. We absolutely have to build more homes. We've been hearing this said for decades now. We've got to get on and do it. We've got to make them cheap. And one of the best proposals I've read about that is making what we used to call, just after the Second World War, prefabs. There's a very good proposal in which should be under consideration to build more affordable homes in high-demand places like London, in factories. You make them using timber frames or synthetic frames, and you can assemble them on site in under a week. And that's cheap, and it's quick, and it's affordable. And we should be doing it and not just talking about it.
See, I don't agree that we haven't got enough housing. You've built a lot of housing. It's totally unaffordable. Where I live in Ealing,
that's the reason.
Ealing is
Supply and demand.
Completely overbuilt now, but it's empty because the rents are too high and the costs are too high, and nothing is being done about that.
There are fewer empty homes in this country than most other European countries.
No.
The issue is you need to build more homes of any kind.
Well, you need to make them affordable.
There's a woman here in the front.
They're not affordable. They're not affordable.
Well, you need to build homes of all kinds, including affordable
OK, let's let the audience get a word in.
Robert, they are not affordable. I'm a mother of 4 children. I have 2 under the age of 3 that I have to pay childcare costs for, which is £900. When me and my husband go into a mortgage application, the first thing they ask is, what are your expenditures? I mean, I'm paying £900 just in childcare. How am I ever going to get a mortgage?
And let's hear from the man next to you. Yes, the guy in the black T-shirt.
Yeah, sorry, we talk about building more houses, but I think one of the biggest problems we have is are those houses going to the right people? I live in northwest London, in Wembley. There are things going up everywhere, but they're being bought up by private companies sometimes, by investors, and then they're being rented out for extortionate prices to the people who really need it. So is it really going to...
Woman here in the white top.
There's lots of schemes. I've seen lots of schemes for shared ownership and these types of things, but some of them, if you go through them, they have like a application, just, like a pre-one, and they ask for your income. So if you don't earn about 44,000, you can't afford it, because for the shared ownership, you have you own 25%, and then you still have rent, and then you have service charge. So by the time you're finished, you're paying like £1,000 anyway. So it's still too expensive.
Yeah, no, I understand that. In fact, when I was housing secretary, I changed that. So there's a new model of shared ownership now where you can buy just a 10% stake to begin with, and then you can increase your ownership of that property in £1,000 increments. So it is, I completely understand where you're coming from, and the old model didn't work, but it is better than it used to be.
I'm afraid I'm out of time. I'm sorry, because it's such an important topic for so many of you, but we've run out of time. We're going to have to end it here. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you for all of you coming this evening and putting your points of view with such passion and articulacy. And thank you, of course, to you at home for watching. from Question Time. Bye-bye.